Okay, Victor, if you'd like to tell us a bit about the history of the building and how you came to buy it and run it.
The Wellington, the original oldest part, which is the rear of the bar by the pool table, rooms 21, 23, 9 and 10. That's the 16th century part of the building. Additions were added onto it in Georgian times about 200 years ago, which is rooms 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7, the restaurant and the lounge adjacent to the restaurant. The most modern part of the building, contrary to what people think, is actually the tower. Now, I originally thought the tower was built in, well, I knew it was built after 1860 because I've got the signing in book of 1860 when people like Baring Gould stayed here, wrote On Christian Soldiers. But from America, we've got some original sepia photographs taken there down in the ground floor lobby. I think they were taken in 1881 of the Wellington without the tower. So the tower was added after 1881. This helps us actually date one of the particular ghosts, which was seen twice moving from 16 or 17 through originally a window and then what is now a door, the fire escape door from our flat. Solange and I moved here from South London. We'd been living in Kuwait for 3.5 years. I worked for an Arab bank. Solange worked for a French Kuwaiti company, Pont-a-Mousson, as well as working for KISRA, the Kuwait Institute of Scientific Research. I've actually been in Kuwait 5 years. I bought a Victorian house in Clapham next to my grandmother, off in Shandon Road, off Aberville Road near Clapham South. And after living in Kuwait, which was basically concrete blocks and deserts, and after living in South London, which in some respects was a bit nicer but not much better, we wanted somewhere very, very different. And we decided to buy a hotel, restaurant and a pub. And after looking at 36 businesses, the Wellington, one, the setting, the place is so beautiful, you know, it nestles in the two valleys. I've got 10 acres of land out the back that I can just go and disappear in the woods, you know, when I want to get away from people. It had loads of character. It was totally different to what we had been used to for the last 5 years. And after looking at 36 places, we decided on the Wellington. We've been here 16 years now.
Were you aware of its haunted reputation before you bought it?
Fractionally. I mean, we made 2 or 3 trips down here to look at the place and so on before we came here, and you chat to the locals and the staff that were here then, and you hear these things. And I personally was not a believer or disbeliever. I mean, I took it for what it was. If somebody saw them and they believed it, so be it. If somebody else said that couldn't be true, you know, so be it. However, my own opinion changed when I actually saw, in the early days, we'd only been here a few months, I actually saw one of the many-sighted ghosts myself. I mean, this, when I say many-sighted, this particular ghost had been seen by a lot of people prior to me. And that was the ghost of the coachman. I described him as a coachman because he had highly polished leather gaiters, a suede sort of sleeveless tunic. He had tricolor hat, sort of puff sleeves. I was sitting in reception, which was open in those days. It was just like a counter, and he was at the top of the stairs. We'll see this later. And I saw him come along the stairs. Now, the interesting thing was I actually saw him in colour. I saw the russet browns and so on. A lot of people say ghosts are only seen in monochrome, but I know this now not to be true from my own personal experience. I came down from reception down to the bar, and our head barman, who's now retired, Tom, had been here 20 odd years, and I started to describe this ghost. Before I actually finished the description, he carried on describing what I'd seen without me telling him, and finishing the description, which I thought was incredible. From that, I naturally assumed that he had seen the ghost, and he said, "No, I haven't, but I've had this ghost described to me many times before." we employed one of my neighbour's sons who now lives in America. He's married to a modern English history lecturer in Portland, Oregon. And he's worked here on and off for sort of 20 or 30 years, and he lived in. Then he worked for me, and he lived out when he worked for me. Fell madly in love with this American lady, went off on 2 weeks holiday, and never came back for 7 years. When he came back, she had seen our website in the meantime, and he said, it's very interesting. And he said, yes, I knew loads about the ghost. And he had seen this same ghost of the coachman, but he'd seen the ghost of the coachman in room 23. But I said, can you remember, John, whether you saw it in colour, the sort of russet rounds or whatever, of the suede and the leather, or in monochrome? And he's pretty sure that he saw it in sort of shades of grey. The other sightings is at the top of the tower, and this must be a more recent ghost, because in the cases of all the ghosts, asking locally, asking the sort of very old and bold in the village, we've never ever been able to trace the history of any of the ghosts. And as you well know, they're supposed to be the souls that have not been laid to rest. But we had a retired policeman, ex-Royal Navy, Bill Searle, was our handyman porter. He was in his 60s, maybe early 70s, very, very tall guy, about 6'4". And he was working up on the landing outside 16 or 17. He saw this young girl come out through the door. I think it must have been 17, but he's not sure, 16 or 17, and disappear through a window which led out to the side of the tower, and then you could get to the top of the tower from the roofs where the castellated part is. He came down quite shaken. About 1.5 years later, he came down absolutely petrified. He'd seen the same girl, the same ghost, but this time moved through the door of our flat, because we had converted the attic adjacent to the tower into a flat for Solange and I, but the ghost made the same trip through. The third ghost, and I would say possibly the most cited and the most documented in sort of recent times since I've been here, is what I call the ghost of the little old lady. And she's often or not seen sitting on the end of the bed in room 10. She wears a black dress, she's very short, and she wears a black cloak. I mentioned to our friend that this has been seen with residents who've had conversations with her, who have told the resident about the receptionist's routine, how she didn't spend very long there, how she was a friendly ghost, how she looked over this girl and kept an eye on her and made sure she was safe, because she was so considerate. The ghost thought that that Sandra didn't like to disturb her. The truth was, unbeknown to me, Sandra was so scared of the feeling of the ghost, she never spent very long in the room anyway. A very, very amusing story, and if the two girls concerned may be in the bar this evening, they're both local. We had a receptionist called Jackie Ferret and a chambermaid called Debbie. And we have a list, and there's basically 3 categories of room on this list. There's what we call redo. That's when one party has left, so the room's got to be completely stripped, started from scratch, ready for somebody else to move in. There's a tidy, that's where somebody has stayed and we're just remaking the room, tidying it, but the room's not to be let to a third party. Or there is a check where the room is unlet and it just has to be checked to make sure there's no leaks, that the radiators are on the right setting, that the windows are closed or whatever. Room 9 was down as just a check. Debbie was coming down the corridor from room 6 and 7, past room 8, where there's a side entrance out to the garden. And Debbie saw a lady go through the door of room 9. So she's quite embarrassed because she was going to go in there just to check the room. She didn't know if it was a redo, if it was a tidy or what. But to Debbie, it certainly looked occupied. So she comes downstairs to Jackie and she has a go at her. She said, Jackie, you told me that room 9 was only a check. I've just seen a little old lady go through the door. Jackie said, no, I'm not. Look, there's the accommodation book, there's the housekeeper's list. There's nobody in there. And Debbie said, yes, I've just seen someone go through the door. When she said through the door, she realised what she had said, that she actually saw an apparition go through the door. The door wasn't open, but sort of drift through. The most recent one of all, and I've tried to sort of get explanations for this, was 2 weekends running we had parties in London. So what we did, we went on Thursday or Friday, stayed a few days, came back on Sunday night. We had a couple and we didn't know that they were interested in the paranormal or sort of psychic matters, but it transpired they were, and they were staying in room 3, which is the 4-poster, immediately below the bathroom of our flat. Now we were in London, and they are sure, they absolutely swear, that they heard at 3 o'clock in the morning people moving furniture. Now, I have had this before, and we have wrongly assumed that it's me getting up in the night, that it's Solange's half-Siamese cat or one of the cats running around. I used to have a Springer St Bernard dog. After the Springer St Bernard, who was quite heavy, I had a Great Dane who was even heavier. We assumed that these noises that people were hearing, but they always described it as the same, as furniture moving, that it was explained like that. But this particular weekend, this was only 5 or 6 weeks ago, Solange and I were in London, so there was no way we were upstairs moving, doing anything at 3 o'clock in the morning. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, this village is like a ghost town. I mean, you can hear, you can hear a pin drop. I mean, my dog Murphy used to hear people walk from over the bridge at night from our flat because it was so high up in the summer when the windows were open. So what that was, I don't know. I mean, there is no explanation for it, but we had other people bring it to our attention before, almost as a complaint, what were you doing moving furniture around at 3 o'clock in the morning? And it's usually around this time as well.
So prior to you and Solange moving into the Wellington, have either of you ever had any paranormal experiences before? Or was it something you weren't really into?
I have seen some very, very weird things. I mean, and this is very interesting, and you're going to be absolutely horrified, but I don't believe in lying, and you seem to be interested in more than the paranormal. A friend of mine hypnotised his girlfriend when we were about 16 or 17. And we believed that she had been involved in the occult. He took her back. So what he was trying to do was to take her back through from sort of 17 or 18, however old you was, to take her back, to try and find out at what age she was involved in the occult. And he got her back, I can't remember now, but he got her back to about the age of 5 or 7. Well, like so many things when you play stupid games, you read the first 3 chapters of the book, and he's not read the rest of the book to bring her forward, from the age of 5 or something. And I always remember the old-fashioned anoraks that had pockets here, and he always used to he always used to carry a big crucifix in there, being a good Catholic. He was a Catholic, that was one to do. So he pulls this crucifix out, and in desperation, he slaps it in his girlfriend's hand. She screams, and the crucifix, and this is in my parents' lounge in South London in Balham, as I said, the sort of youngest teenagers. I can't remember, must have known. I don't think we could have been 70, must have been 80. This crucifix goes flying across the room. And we open her hand, and there's the burn of the cross in her hand. But that's the only other experience I've had of the paranormal. And I personally have not seen any ghosts here since the one that I told you about.
Are you aware if any of the goings on here have been documented in other books, or?
Yes, Peter Underwood has written quite a lot. There's another writer called Peter Folks, Folkes, who actually was a regular resident here, the same as Peter Underwood. And he was a writer, but not necessarily a believer. And he's now moved and settled in Port Isaac. Mind you, I haven't seen him for some time, so, but he wasn't young, so maybe he's not getting around so much. And with Peter Folks, it was very, very interesting because he was in, and there's always a disagreement between my wife and I whether they were in room 10 or room 21. I still believe to this day that they're in room 21 because Joe, who's on duty tonight, thinks that the ghost activity is increasing in 21 at the moment. They are feeling more of a presence in 21 than they have in the past. Anyway, Mrs. Fawkes and Mr. Fawkes are in, let's say 21, because that's what I believe it to be. We're in 21 with their dog. And Mrs. Fawkes and the dog see the ghost moving across the end of the bed, past the chest of drawers, towards the wardrobe or wherever it was. Mr. Fawkes, who's actually the ghost writer, doesn't see anything. We had another lady, she was a foreign lady, and she was in room 10. And I think she had a dog as well, that her and her dog, you know, saw the ghost. I'm trying to think, cable television, live TV owned by the Mirror Group, have a series called The Wire Files, and they did a documentary, quite a good video on it. But I haven't got a video down here that I think will work, and it won't sync on the one I've got on the flat. But I can give you the series. It's series 29 of the Wire Files. I mean, if you rang them up, because it appeared. Or we also appeared in Encounters magazine.
That's how we.
Yeah. But I think that's defunct now.
It has, yeah. Yes. They did us a service.
And us.
So you said you've already been interviewed once this week by a group interested in the ghost side of the building. Does that happen quite a lot? Do you get many people
I'm not so sure. The people who interviewed us this week, it was quite interesting because they were actually from Bournemouth and Paul College, and they were doing media studies, and they were staying down in Port Isaac, and they seemed to be doing a whole series of things, and they'd never been to Boscastle before. And when they arrived, they'd phoned to ask if they could video and interview me. But yes, but what is happening, and this could be a function. We had our website rejig last year, and we improved, the search engines and the meta tags and so on. And the interesting ghost seems to have increased in the last year. Now, whether it's a function of more people searching the web and picking it up on our website, I don't know. That's the only thing I can believe it to be.
There certainly is an increase in the interest, because our group has grown in the last couple of years since we went public. So I think it's out there. We just need to give them the right information to keep people interested. Going back to the hotel, does anything odd ever happen out in the grounds, or was it all confined to the actual house itself?
There's one, and if you speak to Graham, the barman who'll be on, I think he's on duty. No, he's on duty a bit later on. There is one ghost downstairs in the lobby. Well, it's interesting how people see the same thing, but they occur the opposite way around. I thought this ghost, and so did everybody else, so did some others, thought the ghost came from the stairs into the barrel cellar. However, Graham thinks he's seen it with others go from the barrel cellar to the stairs. And we have checked, and dozens of people have seen this. And we have checked, for lights of cars coming round the corner and things like that, and we cannot attribute it to anything. We've been there fairly recently in the bar, and I think the receptionists were talking about this, where a glass has just exploded. Now, this isn't a glass that's just been washed or just come out of the glass washer. It was right on the bottom, tucked away, I call them reserve glasses for when you're really busy. We've had things come flying off the shelves in the still room, but in the grounds itself, no, I don't know of anything. There is quite a well-documented ghost in the mill that Peter Underwood has written about, and he's supposed to be the miller.
So have you had proper groups come in to investigate your ghosts, or just individual people?
We have had one group come to investigate. I'm trying to think how long ago. Quite some time ago, about 3 or 4 years, and they had these sort of paranormal meters and things like that they would, and they got a lot of activity in this corridor from sort of 7, 9 and 10. I don't know how they actually monitor it. The journalist who came here from Encounters magazine, he came to investigate it, and if you've seen the article, he said there was a definite moaning, there was a definite something going on that night, but I mean, that could have been anything, I don't know.
Didn't he think that someone had left something on his tape? He left his equipment
Yes.
in his bedroom, and when he went to use it, there was something
There
already
was
on
something
there.
there, yes.
Which was rather odd.
Very strange. And it's interesting that activity occurs in that's what I said earlier, that activity around rooms 9 and 10 and in that area seems to be what I call the most documented. In other words, the most different people have seen either the same thing or fractionally different things, but they all seem to relate.
You said earlier that, as far as you're aware, there's no historical evidence for...
No, I can't find... You look for someone who's committed suicide or someone who got murdered or something like that. Now, when I had someone really sort of digging into the parish records and so on, trying to find this out, they came up with a possible answer to this problem. We are, and the Wellington Halls has been, an inn, a coaching inn, a hotel. So you have two types of transient population. You have the staff, who, though they may live in, this is not their primary residence. And you have your guests, who, though maybe staying here, are only staying here for maybe 1 or 2 nights, certainly a week or two at the longest. So the only people who actually stay here long term are people like Solange and I, who live here because it's our business. And maybe this is why we can't find anything of the history of these ghosts. Because to me it's so interesting, because the coachman that I saw, Tom the head barman knew the description, and John Sandicote had seen, and he said a lot of other people had seen. A girl popped in to see me only last week with her husband Janice, and she had seen these ghosts. The little old lady in room 9 and 10 and the sort of activity around there, this had been seen by a lot of different people. The ghosts of the young girl in room, say 17, going through the window, on the landing of the top tower. I've not spoken to that many people other than Bill, and maybe I have, but I can't remember who'd seen that ghost. But you would think with, taking the first 2 examples, where a lot of people had seen the same thing, that somebody, even if it wasn't true, would have made up a story. They would have said, oh yeah, well, the only story I've had made, there was supposed to be one story of somebody who was supposed to have committed suicide in 23, hung themselves. And the story that the girl that came from 17 was supposed to have been crossed in love and had committed suicide from the top of the tower. But there is no documentation of this. There's nothing in the parish records or newspaper cuttings, or if they had newspapers then.
So this building was actually built purposely as an inn? That's why it wasn't like a private residence to start with. It was always an inn.
As far as I understand it, yes, it was an inn from the 16th century.
Right.
Well, actually, they say that in the 15th century there was a bakery here. That comes from Roger Little of the pottery.